Whit Weeks gives great news on his injury update. You'll hear it next, Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Some awesome news for LSU football. Whit Weeks, defensive captain, heart and soul of the Tiger defense, who was really limited in spring after a disappointing year, an injury-plagued year in 2025, started to ramp up more of his on-field work in the second half of spring football. And on Friday, he was a guest on Off the Bench with Jacob Hester, former LSU running back, on 104.5 ESPN radio in Baton Rouge. And Whit Weeks provided an update on his injury recovery.
Yeah, for me personally, I mean, getting those reps was huge for me at the end of spring because it really just gave me the confidence to know that I can do it, because really this is the best my ankle's felt since sophomore year.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a struggle for me last year, but got some stuff cleaned up in January, so now I'm ready to roll again.
Best he's felt since sophomore year, and noted that he got some stuff cleaned up there in January. So three things we want to talk about: the reps, the sophomore year, and the cleanup. So remember, throughout spring, in the 15 spring practices, initially Whit was just out there, headset on, standing by the defense, not really participating at all, just in wearing his jersey and shorts and just standing by the defense, next to Blake Baker, headset on, just being sort of a coach on the sideline, so to speak. A few weeks into spring, or a few practices, and we saw Whit off to the side with trainers doing agility work. So he was moving around. Then we started to see him do the individual work, and that's what they call indie, when you go with just your position coach. So he was doing the linebacker drills with Blake Baker, Chris Kiffin. And then at the end of spring, we saw Whit doing 11-on-11 work. Now, no contact, but at least he was out there running around doing football type thing. So that's what he was talking about. Look, this is something Lane Kiffin, during spring even talked about with Whit, was needing him out there to do some more of that on-field work.
I think guys have done a good job. We've moved people around a little bit.
Forgive me, that was the wrong cut. I'm sorry. All right, here we go.
Yeah, they have a great relationship. Like I said, I'm excited to get Whit back out there and get him to work. It's been good, for other guys getting the opportunities, but he and Blake have a really good relationship, but we need him to get back out there and, help us get better offensively by going against him. So I'm really looking forward to that as we, see it's fully cleared.
So throughout spring, Lane was wanting Whit obviously out there more. We saw him near the end of spring get out there, run around a little bit more. You heard Whit also say it's the best he's felt since sophomore year. Now, that should be great news for LSU fans and maybe a scary thing for the rest of the Southeastern Conference. Remember, as a freshman in 2023, Whit was awesome. When he played in 11 games. He made 3 starts. He had 49 tackles, and that was the 2023 defense that was the worst defense in LSU history statistically. But every time Whit was on the field, it was just noticeable that the defense was better when he was out there. And he was a productive player, as we said, when he was out there. 3.5 TFLs, just a half a sack. But when he was out there, it was really good. 2024, Blake Baker's first year at LSU, Whit's sophomore year, is when he flourished. Of course, he had 125 tackles that season, which led the SEC. He had 10 TFLs, 3.5 sacks, a couple of forced fumbles. He was a first-team All-SEC player in 2024. He was just flat awesome. So you go into 2025, and Whit is the team captain, and he's at SEC Media Days. He's a preseason first-team All-American, and everyone's expecting this big step, year to year for Whit, probably going to be a draft guy. And then we know what happens. He suffers the injury against Ole Miss late in the game where he gets landed on, doesn't realize he has a fractured ankle. He tries to play against South Carolina on that injured ankle. And it was after that game that he realized it wasn't right. And from that point on, it was just limited that we saw Whit. Now, he was out there and played in 8 games, but really it wasn't a full 8 games. Even remember the Florida game, the first defensive series against Florida is when he got flagged for targeting. So he only played 3 defensive snaps against Florida. So he played 8 games, but really you take out Florida, that's 7. And then you look at Western Kentucky, where he was really just out there against Western Kentucky so that the 3 Weeks brothers could be on the field at the same time. And then he played against Oklahoma, didn't play in the bowl game. And he was limited against Oklahoma, only about 30 snaps. So really, yes, he played in 8 games, but you got a full Whit Weeks really for 4 games last year. So because when he was playing South Carolina, he was injured. So you got 4 fully healthy games of Whit Weeks. Now he's telling you he feels better than he did, or as good as he has since sophomore year, which is when he was first team all SEC. And then you heard him talk about the cleanup procedure as well. That shouldn't be a red flag to anybody. That's actually pretty common. This week, we heard about that in the NFL with former Tiger Malik Neighbors, if you might remember. So Malik, we know, unfortunately, tore his ACL. And an ACL recovery is 9 to 12 months. And he had a cleanup, they said, which is basically just to remove some of the scar tissue. So it's not necessarily a regression. It's more of just a pause in the recovery. So that way you can take the 10 steps forward and feel even better. So that's the fantastic news with Whit Weeks. Sounds good, feels healthy. And listen, Lane Kiffin knows what Whit Weeks, this was Lane during spring, knows what Whit Weeks means to this team.
One of the first goals was keeping Whit Weeks here because I felt playing against him when he was healthy, what he would bring to the defense and what he would bring to the team. And then I also felt when he wasn't playing, the difference in the defense. And it was really neat, even though he's not from the state. I feel a lot when I talk to the players from the state, this special thing about they genuinely have this passion and care for playing in the stadium. And even though he's not from the state, he talked about a big part of why he came back was he didn't want to leave LSU football where it was at. He's like, I came here to a place where everybody was scared to play LSU. That's not the case right now. And when it goes, I want to come back and get the physical football back to LSU and leave it how it was when I came here.
That should be music to every LSU fan's ears. But you heard Lane in that soundbite. That was earlier in spring. But you heard Lane talk about playing against Weeks and feeling him. So remember, what Lane no doubt is talking about there is the 2024 game. That was the LSU Ole Miss game in Tiger Stadium, the overtime game, Kyron Lacey's game-winning touchdown, as we well know. Whit Weeks in that football game against Ole Miss had 18 tackles, 11 of them solo, 2 TFLs, a sack, and a forced fumble. Yeah, I would submit that maybe Lane Kiffin did feel, as an offensive coach, did feel Whit Weeks 40 on the field when that day against Ole Miss, it felt like he made every play and every impactful play as well. Of course, that forced fumble came in a huge spot when Ole Miss was in LSU territory. So, yes, Whit Weeks being on the field for LSU, returning was a massive priority. We've told you that. There were 3 players on offense and 3 on defense that this new staff prioritized retaining. The offensive players were Trades Green, Braylon Moore, Harlan Berry. Defensively, it was your cornerbacks, Pickett, Woodland, and then, of course, Whit Weeks. So you got all 6 of them to return. A huge focus, and of course, having Whit Weeks back as the center, heart and soul of that defense is massive. Now, how might that actually look? Whit Weeks in that interview with Jake Hester talked a little bit more about year 3 under Blake Baker and the defensive continuity and getting ready for Clemson. You'll hear a lot of that as we continue. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. If you ever opened your bank account and thought, where did all my money go? Well, you're not alone. Keeping track of subscriptions, spending, and bills, that can get overwhelming fast. That's where Rocket Money comes in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks all of your subscriptions in one spot. It can help cancel ones that you don't need in just a few taps. And Rocket Money automatically categorizes your spending so you can actually see where your money is going. And you can set budgets, get alerts, stay on top of upcoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and gives you a clearer picture of your finances day to day. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/locked on. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. So in this interview that Whit Weeks did with Jacob Hester on Off the Bench, again, if you want to hear that full interview, you can just search Off the Bench on YouTube or on podcast, and you can see the full or catch the full interview. Or if you search OTB as in Off the Bench, OTB LSU on YouTube or podcast, you'll get that full interview with Jake Hester and Whit Weeks. Well, in addition to talking about his health, Whit also talked about the projections for this defense in 2026, which, of course, is year 3 under Blake Baker, and that's something that is very important to Whit Weeks.
And that's my guy right there. We're really just like best friends, but he's also my the DC. So it's so much fun to play with a guy who just has the same energy that I do, and he brings so much juice to the building every single day, and he's just so much fun to be around and to play football for.
I think it is. The Baker component of this is so important. First of all, of course, remember, Lane Kiffin did tell us, like, Chris Kiffin is now working with the linebackers, and Blake is sort of having an all-encompassing view. And we saw that throughout spring, where Blake would work at different points with every position group. There were times he was with the linebackers. There was times he was with the stars. There was times he was with the safeties. But he's all-encompassing there. But I think it's so important, the continuity, because remember, let me illustrate this by giving you a contrast. And if you caught our previous episode where we talked about Coach Pete Jenkins, in the defensive line, shout out to our everydayers. If you missed it, go check that out. But one of the things I pointed out is how much turnover they've had on the offensive line. At defensive line coach. Go back to the spring of 2023. In the spring of 2023, Jamar Cain abruptly left to become the defensive line coach for the Denver Broncos. Okay, so that was spring of 20. Remember, 23 was the awful defensive season, but this was the spring before that season started. So Jamar Cain leaves. They promote Gerald Chapman to the interim defensive line coach. Now, they don't retain him full-time. Instead, they hire Jimmy Lindsey. So Jimmy Lindsey comes in as the defensive line coach. Before he even coaches a game, before fall camp begins, Jimmy Lindsey has that scary medical episode. They move John Jancic into coach defensive line. That's 4. During that season, they were struggling so badly. That was the 23 season. They bring back Pete Jenkins sort of as an interim to help with the defensive line. That's 5. Okay, that's 5 from spring of 23 to the midpoint of the season in 20. In 6 months, it's 5 coaches on the defensive line. Then after the season, of course, they hire Bo Davis away from Texas, thinking that's going to be a long-term solution. He leaves for the Saints after 1 year. Then they bring in Kyle Williams, who leaves after 1 year. And now they kick Kevin Peoples down from edge to coach tackle. That's 8. That is 8 defensive line coaches since the spring of 2023. In 3 calendar years, that is 8 different voices coaching your defensive line. It is so hard to build any continuity. Think about defense now with Blake Baker coaching the linebackers, year 3 as the defensive coordinator now. And that's something else that Whit talked about, having that continuity, not only the roster, but also in the coaching staff, and why that matters.
I think having those veterans plus all the coaches coming back, it just allows our defense to keep evolving. This spring, we added so much new stuff into our defense, a couple new schemes that we put in, a lot more 3 down. So it's cool to see how this defense has evolved from Baker's first year going into his 3rd year.
I think that continuity, I can illustrate it again with the defensive line, but I look at the linebacker position where Whit, of course, is the leader, but I look at that position, and that is the one spot on defense where I go, not only do they have great starters, I think they have great experience depth as well. Like, for example, we can look at LSU's edge rushers. And Prince Willoughby was first-team All-SEC. Jordan Ross is a 5-star entering his 3rd year. The guys after those 2, next up is Dylan Carpenter, Damian Shanklin. Carpenter's entering year 4, but he hasn't played except for special teams. Shanklin's a 2nd-year guy who hasn't played much. I can look at cornerback. Your first 3 are set. Like, you feel really good about Pickett, Woodland, and then Jakeem Jackson. If any of those guys misses any time, there is a massive drop-off to whoever is next, which is probably Michael Turner. I mean, that's why you're bringing in JUCO guys right now to give you bodies and options. I mean, at safety, Ty Benefield and TaMarcus Cooley are great, but after that, Jace Thomas is in year 2. Fahim Delane's a transfer who's entering year 2 in college. CJ Jim Coyley, CJ Ross, a couple of second-year guys getting some run back there. But again, after your first 2, gigantic question mark. Aiden Hall, who's a true freshman. Like, it's just a gigantic question mark. So after your starters you feel great about. Linebacker is the one spot where I feel like not only are you great with starters, but depth. Remember, of the scholarship linebackers from a year ago at LSU, the only one that's not returning is Whit Weeks, who graduated. Everyone else is back. Whit, Devon Keys, Tylen Singleton, CJ Ross, Keelan Moses, Zach Weeks. Your entire group is back. You did not lose any of your scholarship linebackers from a season ago. So you look at Weeks, who we talked about there, a couple of seasons ago was first team all SEC, 125 tackles. You bring in TJ Daugherty, who led the SEC in tackles in 2025 with 98. And then you've also got Devon Keys returning, who had 92 tackles, was second in the SEC behind Daugherty last year and led LSU. You got 3 of the top tacklers in the SEC over the top 2 years in Weeks, Daugherty, and Keys. Then you also throw out the fact that Tylen Singleton, with injury last year, had to play a bunch for LSU. And then all the other guys that I just mentioned who are scholarship linebackers who return. So you've got for your first 4 guys you feel really good about, and a lot of talented young players who have been in the program and in Blake Baker's defense as well. And for the questions that I have about the defensive line, like we just talked about the edge rushers, right? You feel good about your first 2, but it's a big drop off after. I'll reference again the episode we just did talking about Pete Jenkins and the defensive line again. Please go check out that episode. It's the previous episode before this one if you want to go check it out if you haven't watched or listened. But we deep dive on the defensive line. But the Cliffs Notes version is at tackle, you got 5 guys that are rotating with the ones. Stephylan Green, transfer from Clemson, Malik Blockton, transfer from Auburn, Dominic McKinley, 3rd-year player, and then 2 true freshmen in Deuce Geralds and Richard Anderson. Well, Green and Blockton each had 18 tackles a season ago. Dom McKinley had 12, and then you got 2 true freshmen. The point is, you have tons of potential upside there with all 5 of those guys, but none has real skins on the wall. So maybe this is a year where that feels like a question. But if those guys can just be disruptive space eaters, perhaps the benefit for this defense is you're freeing up your linebackers to make more plays. Maybe those interior defensive linemen aren't going to be the playmakers, but they will eat up blocks to free up the linebackers to make a ton of tackles in this defense in 2026. All that to say, the fantastic news, Whit Weeks saying that he feels as good as he has since his sophomore year. They slowly ramped him up throughout spring at the cleanup procedure. He'll be ready to roll come fall camp when they're getting ready for the season opener against Clemson, which is something else Whit Weeks noted.
You don't get these opportunities many times in life. I only get to play 7 games in Death Valley for the rest of my life, so I really just got to cherish every moment that I get in that stadium. And when you do get to play a school like Clemson at night, college game day, first week of the season, I mean, those are the games that when you're sitting here in May working out, that's what you're thinking of. That's in the back of your mind. That's what I'm working towards right there, is to win those type of games and that type of moment on the biggest stage in college football.
A great Tiger with a great attitude. And the next time LSU is in Death Valley playing against Clemson, Tiger fans will get to see number 40 running around with his hair on fire, making plays for LSU in this Blake Baker defense. And that is something we sorely missed seeing a season ago for the LSU football Tigers. All right, that'll do it for us here in today's episode of Locked on LSU. Do me a favor, if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked on LSU. It's your team every day.